In the 1960s and 1970s, our African ancestors fought for the freedom from enslavement, from colonization. After the victory of the colonial powers, it was then propagated that our very own African states would then grow into an age of world prosperity. However, more than 40 years now, where do we stand? Truly, the prosperity that was so forth propagated for our continent has not come into power. If it counts for anything, some of our African states are actually in a worse aggravated state than they were during the colonial period. Therefore, I ask you as the generation here today, are you seriously living a life greater than that of our ancestors? This serves quite a dilemma. Today, the height of tribalism is greater than ever before. In the past, our African ancestors united in the goal for independence, putting aside their different tribal identities so they could achieve the common goal of independence. However, today, these very lines of tribalism is what divides our African society. Take, for example, our Kenyan nation. The pioneers of our independence, Jomo Kenyatta, Dedan Kimathi, Oginga Odinga, Tom Mboya, and Harry Thuku. All people of different tribal identities. But in their quest for freedom over our land, they put these very identities aside to achieve the free and non-discriminatory nation that we so live in today. Then take a look across our borders. You can see that we have experienced war. Only 8 years ago was our Kenyan nation on the brink of civil war. Then, across our borders, we look at the country of Somalia. I'm sure you all know the situation right now. These are but a few stories. The Central African Republic, DRC Congo, Ethiopia, Nigeria, each have their story to tell. All stories of how tribalism is rooting issues in the society. Now, over the last 2 decades, the African countries have been devoted towards removing autocrats and promoting multi-party politics. But in the absence to build genuine political parties that compete on the basis of ideas towards a better nation and a better Africa as a whole, we have instead looked towards tribal identities as the foundation for political competition. Nevertheless, I believe hope is still alive. The 1994 Rwandan genocide pays testimony to this. An article published by the Guardian newspaper entitled 20 Years After the Genocide, Rwanda is a Beacon of Hope, highlights how the country has undergone an 8% per annum economic growth. Investment has tripled since the year 2005. Malaria-related deaths have decreased by 85%, and the amount of children dying before their 5th birthday has more than halved. Truly, Rwanda sets the path for all other African countries. With the flip of a coin, Africa has put itself on the map with innovations such as M-Pesa. As of March 2016, the mobile transfer software clocked a 27.1 increase in global users across Africa, Asia, and Europe. However, is this enough pride for us Africans to cling on to? During the recently concluded Rio Olympics that I'm sure many of you watched, it was astounding as a Kenyan to see how many of our very own athletes had denounced their Kenyan citizenship to lead countries that are of non-African states. Now, what are the implications of this? I mean, how do they so easily denounce their African citizenship for countries that are not even of their own? I mean, is there something wrong with our African countries? I mean, how don't they have pride in being African? Now, as you all know, Africa is known for its dominance in track events and the long-distance events. But if our talent is being poached, what does it mean for us? Does it mean that the next time you're watching the Olympics, the only thing you'll be seeing is our very own African-born athletes up on the podium with medals, but not standing up to our national flags or to our national anthems, but instead those of other non-African nations, other non-African states? Now, the trend is apparent. If you pay attention to the red circle, you can see that in the whole of Bahrain's Olympic history, every medal won has been won by an African-born athlete. Therefore, I ask, if it's not athletics, then what do we have as our identity? Maybe it's in our traditions, or maybe it's in our tourism and wildlife sector. However, still to this very identities still exists a threat. Take, for example, tourism. Tourism has been hit hard by terrorism. The East African coast is now unfavorable to international tourists who'd rather visit the Caribbean, where there's greater safety. Then take tribalism again. Tribalism still roots issues to the tourism sector. For example, in 2015, tribal clashes broke out between the Maasai and the Kalenjin in Narok County, which hosts the world's best game park, according to the World Travel Awards, Masai Mara. Again, poaching is hot on the heels of our African elephants. As of this year, 105 metric tons of ivory was set ablaze, worth $100 million. Now, the real implication of this is that this 105 metric tons of ivory represents about 6,000 to 7,000 dead elephants. Then we take a look onto our traditions. Every day when I go to school, I pass by a woman who is always dressed in this attire. I have been privileged for the last 4 months to attend an Asian-dominated school. This right here is a lehenga and a choli. Now, over these 4 months, it has been astounding to see how culture forms such an intricate part of their daily life. For the first few times when I saw this woman dressed in this attire, I wondered, couldn't she keep up with the latest trends in the fashion biz? But on deeper realization, it came to me the only reason she wore this every day was because of the deep pride she had for Indian heritage, which challenged me to look within myself and see what did I have to show for my African heritage. And which is my question to you. What do you have to show for the Africa within you? Therefore, if these realities of corruption, tribalism, loss of pride, and loss of heritage are part and parcel of the society we so live in, then what are we as the youth seated here today and outside there doing about it? And is there any potential that through our actions, we can actually deliver Africa into a greater edge? If you ask me, 1,000 times yes. In 2000, world-recognized magazine, The Economist, releases a cover magazine entitled The Hopeless Continent. This is after looking at Africa's economic growth for the previous 10 years, in which it was only 2%. In 2012, the same magazine releases a new cover magazine page entitled Africa Rising. This is after Africa undergoes a 5.5% economic growth. Further, in the same magazine, in an article entitled Africa's Hopeful Economies, The Sun Shines Brighter, highlights how Nigeria's cement tycoon, Aliko Dangote, is now the richest black person alive, overtaking Oprah Winfrey. It also goes on to suggest how countries such as Ghana, Mozambique, and Ethiopia are amongst the world's fastest-growing economies. Economists further believe that by the year 2050, Africa could move from a $2 trillion economy to a $29 trillion economy. That means by the year 2050, Africa could have the net value worth more than Europe and America combined in today's currencies. However, as much as we talk about the potential for Africa, this potential can only be realized as us, the youth seated here today, realize our potential to change this continent. Juliana Rotich pays testimony to this. Juliana Rotich is the current executive director of Break.org and the co-founder of Ushahidi. Her, together with her team, set up what is called the Brick. Now, the Brick is a hardware device that enables you to stay connected to the internet, even when power goes out or so annoyingly happens in our continent. It does this by connecting you to the nearest GSM network. Now, this innovation shows the product when Africans are no longer global consumers of solutions, but rather creators, which is my vision for each and every one of you. If each and every one of us here is able to generate solutions to alleviate the problems within our socio-economic fabrics, then the advancement of this continent will be 1,000 times faster than it is today. For Juliana and her team, she has driven Africa towards a global digital revolution. So therefore, I ask you, and you, and you, and you, and you back there, what are you doing today to further this continent? Finally, as I finish, my purpose here today was not to try and combat the content put out there about Africa, because it is true, but rather to provide a changed mindset as to how our continent is seen. Instead of intoxicating the world on what is so wrong with our continent, why not offer them the interesting establishments we have to offer? And as the next generation of Africans, work to alleviate the problems we face as the present African society. In the words of Nelson Mandela, sometimes it falls upon a generation to be great. You can be that great generation. Let your greatness blossom. I believe as the youth seated here today, if we cultivate our minds and our skills, we can deliver Africa into a greater age. Thank you.